Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange, and today I am so excited to bring you a video I've been wanting to film for a really long time, and that is my recommendation for horror books about possession and exorcisms. As you probably know by this point, those are two of my favorite subgenres of horror, and they typically cross over together. I just love the psychological aspects to it. I have a Catholic background, which always adds to my enjoyment, and I just find them particularly creepy. So I have some good books to recommend here, and I would love to get your recommendations at the end. Let's get into the books. Let's start by getting the obvious classic out of the way and talk about The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty. This is a story of a mother and her young daughter. The daughter begins to play with a Ouija board and then afterwards is acting very strangely. The mother is worried about her. At first she seeks medical advice. However, when they cannot solve the issue, she turns to the Catholic Church and goes down the path of getting her daughter exorcised. And yes, I've seen the movie, which is really good and definitely follows a similar plot to the book, but the book itself is definitely worth reading. I've said before that I'm not the biggest fan of classics. They're just something I don't tend to reach for, but I found this one to be very accessible, very easy to read, quite creepy, and just a really good story. So even though it's an older book, it really holds up. I would absolutely recommend checking it out. And I think if you're newer to the subgenre of possession, I think this is a really good place to start, just because it will give you the foundations and kind of let you see the classic tropes of what normally happens in these stories. And it's a great one to read, and yeah, I think it's definitely a good starting place. Now I want to switch gears and talk about a horror book that you maybe haven't heard of before, and that is Sorrow's Point by Danielle DeVor. This is a possession story that is about a man who used to be a priest but has left the faith. He is contacted by one of his older friends who wants him to take a look at his daughter because he worries that she is possessed. He's reluctant to do so because, again, he's no longer a priest, but he decides to help his friend out. He ends up teaming up with a woman who is a Wicca witch, and so together they go into this house and assess the girl and decide that they need to do an exorcism. Now, not only do I feel like this book is a little more underhyped than some of the other books I'm going to talk about here, but I also like to recommend this book to those of you that are less interested in the exorcism subgenre because of the fact that perhaps you don't really enjoy reading books that are so focused around the Catholic faith and the priesthood. Because while this book does involve an ex-priest, the exorcism that they do in this book is based off of Wiccan traditions, and I thought it was just very different and unique and definitely mix things up for sure. So I think if you're someone that doesn't like a lot of religious overtones in your horror books, this is a good one to try out. And again, I don't see enough people talking about it online. It is the start of a series, so if you enjoy it, you can keep reading, which is always a bonus. Speaking of series, I also want to recommend a young adult one, and that is, of course, The Merciless by Danielle DeVor. This is one of my personal favorites. I don't read a lot of YA, but in my opinion, this one will definitely appeal to a wider adult audience. It is gruesome and wonderful. This story is about a teenage girl that moves to a new school. She makes friends with these popular girls, and together they decide that they need to exorcise this other girl that they see at their school that is just acting strangely. There's a lot of rumors around her that she is the cause of many accidents, and they just believe that she's possibly possessed and decide to take matters into their own hands. This book is often described as torture porn because what they call an exorcism is not what you would typically see in a Catholic ceremony, but rather a group of girls torturing this girl and causing her physical pain. So it's definitely bloody, gruesome, all of those things. I went into this book with the incorrect idea that young adult books couldn't actually be that scary and that they had to kind of be watered down horror. And this book absolutely proved me wrong. It's one of the most terrifying horror books I've read. And while it does have a lot of the young adult tropes in it, I think that at the same time, it has an intensity to it that will definitely draw in older readers. So I would definitely recommend it. A lot of people call this book The Exorcist meets Mean Girls, and that is very much true. You have a lot of dynamics between the girls. They are hiding secrets and there are love interests and all of that. And it just takes the idea of how terrible girls can be to each other and take it to a whole nother level. So if you enjoy books that center around how terrible girls are in school especially, this one is a good one to check out. I don't want to give away too much of the plot, but I will say that this is an exorcism story. It's not necessarily a possession story, but it's definitely one I recommend. I mentioned this is the first book in a series, so if you enjoy this, there is a follow-up, The Merciless 2, that follows one of the characters afterwards that goes on to a boarding school. And there is also a prequel that involves one of the characters, and that one is more focused around an evangelical Christian group, so it doesn't, again, have that Catholic focus. And finally, the fourth book, The Last Rites, is about girls that go off to party in Italy, and things go terribly wrong. But all of those books do have an element of an exorcism in them, and I definitely recommend the series. They are very bingeable and a lot of fun. Next, I want to talk about My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix, and this is a story that is set in the 80s and follows two teenage girls that are best friends. However, one of the girls begins to act strangely and her best friend becomes worried that something is wrong with her. Her parents don't seem to take it very seriously, and so the friend is forced to take matters into her own hands, and she becomes convinced her friend is possessed and needs to help her. Now, this is one of those horror books that is so beloved online that I really did want to include it here, but full disclosure, it's not actually one of my personal favorites, but I don't think it's a bad book. It just simply didn't quite work for me, and that's more something I personally struggle with Grady Hendrix's storytelling, but I think he is still a very awesome writer and puts together some really smart stories that play around with the tropes of the horror genres, and that's very much the case here. He tells a story that really plays on a lot of the classic tropes that you would see in something like The Exorcist, but spins them on their head and makes it something different. He is very self-aware as an author, and he manages to bring in a lot of humor and satire into his books while still bringing out an edge that can make the books quite scary for a lot of readers. So if you're interested in picking it up, I definitely recommend trying it for yourself. Again, I feel like my personal impression of the book was just something that was very much tied to my niche reading taste, but there's a lot to love about it. There's a reason I'm still recommending it, even though it wasn't a personal favorite of mine. Now, to switch to a book that I absolutely love and talk about way too much on my channel, I do want to mention Come Closer by Sara Gran. This is technically a novella, but it is quite the story that is packed into a little package. And this is a first-person possession story. It's about a woman who believes that something is not quite right with her. She hears strange noises, she hears tapping in her apartment, and despite having a wonderful life, she is just uncertain what is going on, and eventually she starts to wonder if she is possessed. A book shows up in the mail that has the signs of being possessed, and she starts to tick off the different boxes and realize that she is falling into a classic case of possession, or maybe she's just crazy. And I love this book for so many reasons. First, the fact that it is told in the first person perspective is really unique. You'll notice that all the other books I'm talking about here, for the most part, are told from a secondary perspective, so you're outside of the person's mind and you really don't get to see what is actually happening in their head. And this book is so scary because of the fact that it doesn't go too far, but instead really dances around the side of normal, and you find yourself relating to things, thinking, oh, well, that's not too weird, I've done that myself. And then things just start to get a little worse and worse. And I absolutely love this book. I don't feel like enough people have read it, and I just can't recommend it enough, which is why I talk about it so much on my channel. I try not to be repetitive, but if I'm gonna give a recommendations video for possession stories, I have to talk about this one. Now, for something a little bit different, I also want to mention The Last Days of Jax by Jason Arnopp. This is a story of a very unlikable, obnoxious journalist who decides to write a book about the supernatural. He is a huge skeptic and doesn't really believe in things like exorcisms and possession, but he decides to write a book and basically debunk the whole area. And this book is written in a unique way because you know from the beginning of the story that Jax dies by the end, and what we are reading is basically his unfinished manuscript along with footnotes and endnotes from his brother who is piecing it all together. And so we know that something has gone horribly wrong. Now, this book fits into the possession story genre because it starts out with the character going off to Italy and getting to experience and watch an exorcism take place, He, again, as a skeptic, doesn't actually believe anything is happening. A lot of weird things are happening, and it's actually a pretty scary scene. But he basically goes in with his own commentary and tries to debunk it and just makes fun of it, ends up laughing out loud and completely disrespecting the ceremony. And from there, he gets a lot of backlash online. Now, this story isn't just about an exorcism. There is more going on to it. There is a video that shows up on the internet, and the author of the book is trying to figure out what happened to that video, how it was filmed, and is it real? And so the book has a big focus on social media, but at its core, those events around the exorcism are really what start off the story and lead through the entire book. And definitely the book is well written. It pulls everything back together at the end, and I would definitely recommend it. This is actually one I did a reading vlog of a little while ago, so if you do want to watch that, I will try to leave a link to that video down below. But I definitely recommend it. It's a little bit different. Again, for those of you that are getting kind of tired of reading the same exorcism tropes over and over again, this book has that element, but it also has a lot more going on. And last but not least, I want to talk about A Headful Ghost by Paul Tremblay. This is a story of a family that is going through financial trouble during the recession. They are struggling to make ends meet, and on top of that, their older daughter seems to be acting strange. They try to get her help, but when the medical community can't help them out, they do turn to their church, and in order to help fund their family, they do agree to go on a reality TV show that is going to film the exorcism that they agree to be part of. Now, this story is told over a few different timelines and primarily told from the perspective of the younger daughter. And you get to see her watching her sister do these strange things. And you get to see the timeline as it leads up to the exorcism actually happening. Now, this book is very self-aware of the possession tropes. The author leans very heavily on the source material of the classic The Exorcist, and you get to see that played out here, but it's done purposefully, so it doesn't feel like he's stealing ideas, but rather doing a lot of nods and appreciation to that classic. And I very much enjoyed this story. It is more literary in nature, it's more character focused, so it is slower paced. And as Paul Tremblay is known to do, this book is also very ambiguous. So in terms of a possession story, it's not as supernatural feeling as some of the other ones I'm going to be talking about here. Instead, the author leaves more up to the reader's interpretation of what's happening. So I think this is a good book to pick up once you have read a lot of the genre and are looking for something that will make you second guess yourself and leave you thinking about the book long after you finish. It definitely has a wow ending, but in a different way than a lot of the classic stories I'm talking about here. So if you haven't read it, I encourage you to try it out for yourself, but go in with an open mind, knowing that it's not quite your classic possession story. So that is it for this recommendations video. I wish I could keep going, but I need to read more possession stories and exorcism stories before I can do that. So please help me out. Leave your suggestions down below. I feel like I've read through a lot of the really popular ones that show up when you Google possession stories online. So if you have some ideas, especially for those that are a little bit more under the radar, I would love to hear about them and try them for myself. Hopefully I can come back once again and do a part 2 of this recommendations video with even more books to share with you all. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.